So today we're going to be drawing a starfish. I've had this for years. I think I used it many times for still life. I quite like the underside actually. That's really rather interesting. But I'm going to go for the top because it's sort of generic starfish drawing. It's a bit like an glazed piece of pottery or something. The surface is very chalky. And you can see all of the little nodules on there, which we're going to attempt with our pencils. You're going to be seeing it from that view, but of course, because I'm at a different angle, I'm going to be seeing it more like that. So you're seeing it like that, I'm seeing it more like this. I will upload a photo at the end, and I'll put it on WordPress too, so that you can use it as an image to refer to. You can get these actually from, well, obviously from seaside towns, but you can get them online as well if you wanted to, or some craft shops do them. Anyway, I'm going to place the starfish there, and I'm going to draw down here. I'm going to use a variety of pencils. I'm going to use a 2B, sorry, HB, 2B, and 4B, nice and sharp. And I'm going to start with my HB. I don't normally start with an HB, but I will for this because it's quite intricate. So as I said, I'm seeing it from that angle. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working out the top and the sort of the bottom, and although the bottom has got two parts to it. So I'm going to work out that the top, and I've got it on a slight angle like that as well. It's slightly skewy. So the top is up here, the middle up here, and then I've got the other leg here. Well, it's not a leg, is it? What do they call it? Limb. The limb. And then the other side comes out to here, and then the other side, might have to move it slightly, comes out here. Right, so I've sort of worked out the general shape of it. And then what I'm going to do is using gestural drawing, nice, easy, relaxed wrist, I'm just going to sort of plot out roughly where these, you see, look, already that's lower than I thought, where these limbs are. So that's shorter because of the angle. One's there, roughly back and forth, back and forth. That one's there. And this one's actually coming down a bit lower. One's like that. And this is just a gestural drawing to just get us the rough shape of everything. We're not going for any detail yet. That can come down a bit like that. That's a bit longer there, and that's like that. So that's sort of generally the right shape, although I can see that I've gone too long on here. So I'm going to tuck that in. I'm not using a rubber at the moment. That's sort of what I can see. Now I've got the sort of mound in the middle, the sort of where it's raised up. I'm going to make a note of how that is. Feels about right to me. What could come to, oops, look, I've lost my lead. Now, if that happens all the time with your pencils, it usually means that the pencil has been damaged in transit. So, um, sharpen it. So sometimes they'll just keep breaking. That's a bit annoying. So I'm just going to sharpen that. So sometimes you just have to chuck the pencil away if it keeps doing it because there's no, it usually means it's cracked further up. It's had some sort of trauma on its journey. Anyway, so I've got my pencil sharpened now. So I've got a very rough feel, not using any rubbers, just feeling the shape of it. And actually, it sort of slightly does curve up at the end, which is quite interesting. I haven't really noticed that before. So again, just going back and forth, finding out if it feels right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding some shading using the side of my HB pencil. I'm just putting in some shade and I'm sort of exaggerating it. I'm trying to find the form of this. So I want to find, there's quite a lot of shade under here. I want to find the general form of this. How do I know the shape of it? Because of light and shade. And that's always the clue. Bit of shade. Well, there's quite a bit of light on the top, so that comes as a bit of shade. Sometimes it's hard to see the shade because you might just have a bit of a darker pattern on it and you're getting confused as whether it's shade or the pattern. So I'm just starting to find the general feel of it. I'm going to go in a bit bolder with the shade, still using the HB for now. I just want to find the general sort of extremities of light and shade. There's a bit in there. And then this is, now I'm feeling like this is actually a bit shorter as I'm looking at it. Now this shade I'm going to go a bit stronger on, still using the HB. It doesn't matter which direction you go in really at this point because it's just plotting it out. It's still quite rough. Okay, so beginning to get there with it. Looks like it's quite alive in my picture. Um, okay, so we've got to think about the various values. We've talked about values before, and what they are is that chart of going from dark to light or light to dark, and you should have a minimum of nine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's say 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The darker side is here, the middle tones are here, and the lights are here. So we have a range of darks, medium, and lights. So in this starfish, we've got to try and fit in this range of 9 values from dark to light. So how am I going to do that? Let me just bring you in a bit closer to my drawing. I've already got what I think is probably number 9 here. I've got about a number 5 here, probably about a number 6 there or 7. So I've got 3 already. So now I need to think about the other one. So I'm going to go for a lighter one, still using the HB. And you can also smudge as well. You can smudge it, and that gives you another value. So I'm just building up some extra values. Now, if you can't fit all 9 values in, that's fine. And also don't forget when you use your rubber, which we will do, to lift off some of the pencil, that becomes another value. That's number 1 on the value chart because it's on the light side. So really, we've probably got about 5 now at least. And the more you draw, the more you'll get used to putting in values. Now I'm changing the direction of my shading here. At the moment, it's not crucial that it's really defining the form exactly. It's doing a lot of the work for me just with a very sketchy, rough light and shade. I don't have to make much effort at the moment. I'm not sort of curving the shade around the shape. And already you can see that the form is coming out a lot better. We haven't got any of the texture on, none of the pattern. We're still finding the form of it. So already you can see that a form, the volume of the mass is beginning to appear. Now at this point, I might want to use an eraser. This eraser is probably about 40 years old, actually. It's a Helix eraser, and I had it when I was at school. Anyway, so now I'm going to use my eraser to lift off some of the pencil along the ridges of the limbs or starfish arms, whatever you want to call them. And that's going to give us another value, and it's also going to lift that center part up more, isn't it? So it looks lighter. I'm also going to use it to rub out what I don't need. So I'm rubbing out all those extra lines that I don't need now. And you do that when you're happy with the form. I always think drawing's like sculpting, really. You're finding a form from a piece of clay almost. So it's beginning to look a bit neater, which is always satisfying. Okay, not the greatest rubber in the world, but I'm very attached to it. Okay, so we've got our form. Now we're going to tackle the different nodules on here. There are thousands. Life's too short to do everything exactly the same. So I'm going to do a sort of generic pattern for it. Now, looking at this pattern, I'm just going to take this away for a second. You could do a sort of squiggly pattern like this, like a whole load of sort of slightly weird circles. Or you could do more obvious circles. I'm going to go for something between the two. I'm going to start with a sort of generic, I'm using that word a lot today, but this sort of squiggly, wiggly, general texture underneath everything. So I'm going to do it all over. I'm going to go squiggly all over the whole thing like that. I'm going to go darker, in other words, pressing still the HB pencil, darker where it's darker. So I'm pressing harder for that. And where it's lighter, I'm going very light. Now, obviously, this looks more like wire wool than a starfish. But what we're going to do is we're doing the sort of easy way. We're going to do this general squiggly sort of pattern. And then what you do is to sort of deceive the brain, if you like. We're then going to pick out some of the nodules. So I'm just doing general squiggles all over. You can see that more clearly like that. Because life is too short, no one's got time unless they're doing a sort of anatomically correct sort of study of marine study of starfish. I mean, who's doing that? I'm not. So I'm just doing a general squiggly pattern all over. It's quite fast as well. Now, I do draw a bit faster than I normally would in these video sessions because obviously your patience probably wouldn't last if I took as long as I normally would. So I do speed it up a bit. But sometimes that's quite good because it forces you to make decisions that you might not normally make. Sometimes having too much time to draw or paint or collage is not necessarily a good thing. It can allow for too much pontification. So look, I've now got generic starfish, wiry, woolly sort of feel about it. And I'm going to use my rubber very slightly and I'm going to tap it like this. So what that does is it gives me a bit of texture whilst lifting off some of the shading. Instead of rubbing, I'm tapping that. Okay, right. Might do a little bit over here as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these and I've noticed that on the top there are these, I suppose they've been scraped. There are some lighter nodules, and they seem bigger on the top here and smaller in here. So now what I can do is pick out some of those. I'm going to start for the shaded area. I can see these sort of nodules like this down there. I'm using the HB. I haven't used any of the others yet, but I will. I will. I'm not doing everything. I'm just picking out. And also the other thing to note is not to do a full circle of a nodule, but just to do a sort of almost like a slightly large C shape, as in a letter C. So instead of doing the full circle, you do sort of more of, you cut part of it out and you can do them like that more. Okay. So that's, I'm just picking some of them out here and they can go much darker when they reach the bottom. I've also noticed that on the limbs, because there are nodules underneath, suckers rather, there are these shapes, sort of undulating shapes. So that is reflected on this side by this sort of wavy, slightly wavy line, which is useful to get in as well. I can go a bit darker underneath because that's where usually the darker shadow is. When an object makes contact with a surface, it's called the occlusion, the occlusion shadow. I nearly forgot the word then. The occlusion shadow. Okay, and then I'm going to do it up here as well. I'm moving around the picture a bit, and it can go darker where it's darker and lighter where it's lighter. And then lighter here, and then darker in here, lighter up here. Might have gone a little bit too dark up here, so I'm just going to rub that back a bit like that. Okay, so I'm just building it up. And I'm going to do the same dark ones in between these two and then a little bit here. So I'm going to turn my drawing round and I'm going to do some of those nodules in here. Like that. And then some on this side. Not so many here because I can't really see all of those. And then some in here. And then see quite a few. Put that back to how it was. Some, it's more, it's more like that. Now, what you can do now is you can rub them back so they're not quite so cartoony, just using my finger, or you can use a blender stick, which is made of cardboard. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a rubber on the end of a pencil. Sometimes these aren't very good, but what you want is you want a white rubber on the end of a pencil. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slightly cut it. I'm going to make it into a point with a knife because I want it to be a little bit more focused. Just cutting it. Now, because it's a rubbish pencil, the rubber's actually come out of it. It just gives me a little bit more of a point to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lift out some light on some of these nodules because I've noticed that some of them are more raised than others. So I'm just using my rubber as if to make a nodule by rubbing the little nodules into the shade. That. A bit closer. Focused. So I'm just using the rubber to rub off little bits of light like that. and it sort of settles it back in a little bit as well. Okay, I'm going to move on to my 2B pencil now, because I'm going to slightly up the ante. I'm going to go a bit more dramatic on these shaded bits, which are actually part of the colour. I'm going to use a circular motion because it keeps the texture. Using the side of the pencil, a circular motion, because I want to keep the texture that I've put underneath. I don't want to flatten it. So I'm going for a circular motion. And that's using a 2B pencil like that. Now, because it's a black and white drawing, we can sort of convey a bit of colour with the shade because we can't show colour. So we're sort of indicating it with a bit of this um, circular texture in a way. Now, how do I know that is quite, it's sort of almost like a landing, like a helicopter launch pad landing on the top. So I'm going to indicate that slightly because I can see that. I keep moving it, don't I? So I've got to go back to how it was. Like that. So you can see what's happening. It's starting to find more form. Now, there is a slight problem, which is that I need to show this area here along the limb needs to somehow go up to that launch pad part up here. So I sort of need a bit more light on this launch pad. It's a bit better. Now, I'm going to indicate some of these larger nodules, still using a 2B. I'm going to show the shape of some of these, and I've noticed that the bigger ones are on the actual pinnacle or peak of the limb. So I'm going to sort of go around like this. I don't want them all to be the same, but I'm just going to indicate those. They're sort of all different shapes, really. I'm going to push that back a bit and then over here. Because these are actually white. So I want to just show where they are. This one's got a slightly different, they do straddle the peak as well. And then they sort of disperse around the sides, like this. And the same on here, they sort of come almost like warts. They look a bit wart-like. And then these are less conspicuous for some reason. There are not so many on here. And then here they're quite prominent. And because I'm doing these in the shade, I'm definitely going to lighten these up at the end with an eraser. There's a few on there, not quite so many. A dotty. Okay, so I've started getting those in, but they're quite rough. So I'm going to just rub them back a bit. like that. And then I can go back in with my eraser and pick some of them out, lighten some of them. So they're not just a line of shade. In other words, an outline. So I'm now going back in with the rubber and lifting off the lighter parts so that it's not just an outlined nodule. It's got light in it. And on this side, they're very definitely lighter. It takes a while to build up, but we're getting there slowly. What we're doing is we're just building up texture, building up, building up. Okay. And then I'm going to go in with my 4B now. I'm going in with the darkest. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade around those so that we haven't got the outline so much. Gently, very gently. Just shade around those nodules and blend them back into what's around them. Always blend in around them to what's beside them. So that you get you're dealing with the negative space, you're dealing with the space around the nodule. What's going on there? Let's see. And I'm going to do the same with the others. Very gently, because we're on the tip of the limb, the peak, it is lighter, so we don't want to do it too dark, but it's nice using a 4B because it's so soft. It's not so harsh, so it's quite good at blending back in. And then move it round to that side. Now, I like these stapler pencils. I've said quite a few times. The German products are fantastic, and the French. And I guess, obviously companies like Winsor and Newton are great. Um, and Derwent are okay, I suppose. But I do think the Germans have really got it sussed in terms of materials. Now, as for papers, we're fantastic. I think English papers or British papers are really fantastic. Like watercolor paper, we've got Bockingford and we've got all the different Cotman and just fantastic papers. So we've got it sussed there. But in terms of the pencils, I don't know. I think German are best. I'm just going back over because the 4B is so nice for getting some shade in that's easy to apply. And what I've done is, okay, it's not quite there yet, but what I've done is I'm just building up the layers, building up, and the texture, of course, the layer, the layers of texture. And you can always blend it back with your finger. So it's beginning to look quite nice actually. I quite like that. Bring it down a bit, and I might lighten it a bit so you can see. Oops, there you go. So it's starting to look quite interesting. Still not enough texture, and there's some texture on the top here. Now it's quite interesting because there's quite a lot of light on here. I'm going to do some quite large nodules up here, and they're not in a uniform. Well, they don't appear to be very uniformed. Like, in a sunflower, for example, other things in nature, they're perfectly uniformed, but I can't see exact patterning here. It just feels quite random, which in a way surprises me, but I'm just going to do some quite large ones that can then come down into these. Now just pick out the ones that are easy. Don't worry about little ones that you can't manage or and again use the rubber to get the light off again for each one. And it's sort of by doing that you get rid of some of the outline as well. You could do that in the HB or the 2B pencil, those lines, by the way, the little nodules, I forgot to say, sorry. So I've just rubbed them back a bit. And now using 2B or 4B, 4B is better, you can, like we did before, blend around the nodules gently. And then we can pick some out later on. So you can see what's happening. Beginning to have quite a nice texture now. So you just carry on like that, just building up texture, rubbing it back a little bit, building up texture, getting some light off with your rubber. I would always say buy a white rubber. The white rubbers are best. And I like to have ones that I can shape and use as pencils in a way where I'm lifting off instead of adding. You could add gentle colour to this. So I've got this pencil here, which is a Derwent, which is a British company, light fast, and this colour is salmon. So let me just sharpen it for you. Well, for me. So it's quite a nice pencil, having said that German products are better. This is a very gentle pink. So you could use this to add a little bit, if you wanted to, just to add a touch of colour to this. So it's almost monochrome, it's almost black and white, but it's not quite. And that's quite a nice thing to do. So I'm just very gently adding colour to this. Not even sure you can pick it up on the camera, I'm not sure. Very subtle, but it is there. You can see that even, it's terribly subtle. It's a really nice colour, this one actually. This is, they're called the Derwent Light Fast. And it just takes the edge off slightly if you want to have a tiny bit of colour. But don't over egg it. Don't make it too salmony pink or, don't overdo it. Just a hint of it is lovely. Okay. And then what I would do is at the very end, once I'd done probably another layer of that, I'd go back with my HB pencil, which is here. And then I would go back in and I would sharpen some things up just to get some sort of slightly sharper edges. And I'd pick out some of these. Remember, not the whole outline, but just some of them on the top here, the little tiny sort of edge of some of those nodules like that. And then I would pick out some shadows. Yeah. And just sharpen up some of the starfish. This side's looking a little bit ropey, isn't it? That's because there's quite a lot of light on there. There's quite a lot of light, so I might increase the dark down there. And then I can actually, because of the angle, better. That's looking better. Okay, so that's quite nice. I might go a bit darker up here. But generally speaking, that's just a fairly quick sketch of a starfish.